Welcome to Management 2110's Chapter 13 lecture, based on the readings from the textbook Management, 14th edition by Robbins and Coulter. So let's get started. So first we'll cover the learning objectives for Chapter 13. We are going to define groups and the stages of group development. Then we're going to describe the major components that determine group performance and satisfaction. Then we're going to define teams and best practices influencing team performance. And we're going to know how to maximize outcomes through effective negotiations. Then we're going to develop your skill at coaching team members. And then we're going to discuss contemporary issues in managing teams. So what is a group? A group is defined as two or more interacting and interdependent individuals who come together to achieve specific goals. Formal groups are work groups defined by the organization's structure and have to designate work assignments and specific tasks directed at accomplishing organizational goals. Informal groups are social groups. Now, these groups occur naturally in the workplace and tend to form around friendships and common interests. For example, 5 employees from different departments who regularly eat lunch together, that's considered an informal group. So Exhibit 13-1 here provides some examples of formal groups. And we're going to start with command groups. And those are groups determined by the organizational chart and composed of individuals who report directly to a given manager. Then there's the task groups. Those are groups composed of individuals brought together to complete a specific job task. Their existence is often temporary because when the task is completed, the group disbands. Then we have the cross-functional teams, and those are groups that bring together the knowledge and skills of individuals from various work areas or groups whose members have been trained to do each other's jobs. And then we have the self-managed teams, and those are groups that are essentially independent and that in addition to their own tasks, they take on traditional managerial responsibilities such as hiring, planning, and scheduling and evaluating performance. So research shows that groups develop through 5 stages. Okay, the forming stage has 2 phases. The first occurs as people join the group. In a formal group, people join because of some work assignment. Once they've joined, the second phase begins. Then that's defining the group's purpose, structure, and leadership. So we have that's the forming. And the first stage of group development in which people join the group and then delineate the group's purpose, structure, and leadership. And it should actually say define the group's purpose, structure, and leadership. Then we have the storming phase, and that's the second stage of group development, characterized by intergroup conflict. Now, the storming stage is appropriately named because of the intragroup conflict. There's conflict over who will control the group and what the group needs to be doing. Now, during this stage, a relatively clear hierarchy of leadership and agreement on the group's direction emerges. So you always see people who are a little bit more directing and controlling or inspirational try to take the lead. And then you always have those refiners, those behind the scenes people whose strengths actually lie behind the scenes and more refinement are okay with others taking the lead. So they kind of step back. But then when you have more than one controlling individual, they tend to jockey for position, and all that happens during this storming phase. And the norming is the third stage of group development, and that's characterized by the close relationships and cohesiveness. So the group starts to form a little bit of cohesiveness here, And the norming stage is one in which the close relationships develop and the group becomes a cohesive team. Now there's a strong sense of group identity and camaraderie. And this stage is complete when the group structure solidifies and the group has assimilated a common set of expectations or norms regarding member behavior. Moving on in the stages of group development, we have the performing stage, and that's the fourth stage of group development when the group is fully functional and works on group tasks. So research has generally shown that highly cohesive groups are more effective than are less cohesive ones. However, the relationship between cohesiveness and effectiveness is complex. So here we also have the adjourning phase, and that's the final stage of group development for temporary groups, during which group members are concerned with wrapping up activities rather than task performance. Now, for temporary groups, project teams, task forces, or similar groups that have a limited task to do, in this stage, the group prepares to disband. So the group focuses its attention on wrapping up activities instead of task performance. So again, when it comes down to the performing, the group structure is in place and accepted by the group members, and those energies have moved from getting to know and understand each other to working on the group's task, whereas in the adjourning, the group's already focused on tasks and it's now transitioning to disbanding or moving on to what's next. So as shown in Exhibit 13-2, the stages of group development are forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Exhibit 13-3 presents the major factors that determine group performance and satisfaction. So you have the external groups, external conditions imposed on the group. There's a lot of that's environmental factors. And then moving on to group member resources, what's available, the structure that's imposed. Moving on to the processes will have a lot of impact on how the group does, and the group tasks come shortly after, and then performance and satisfaction. So external conditions imposed on the group. So they include the organization strategy, authority relationships, formal rules and regulations, availability of resources, and employee selection criteria. These are imposed obligations. There are a lot of things that you can't sway away from. So the group has to encompass all the variables that come along with these things when dealing with the group dynamics, because there's not much you can do. So work groups are absolutely affected by the external conditions imposed on it, such as the organization strategy, authority relationships, formal rules and regulations. So the availability of resources, like I said, employee selection criteria. These are all things that are really outside one's control. So there are obligations that have to, that are imposed on them that they have to encompass in their decision making. So a group's performance potential depends to a large extent on the resources each individual brings to the group. Now, these resources include knowledge, ability, skills, and personality traits, and they determine what members can do and how effectively they will perform in a group. Now, interpersonal skills, especially conflict management and resolution, collaborative problem solving, and communication, consistently emerge as important for high performance by work groups. A role refers to behavior patterns expected of someone occupying a given position in a social unit. Now, in a group, individuals are expected to do certain things because of their position or role in the group. Now, these roles are generally oriented towards either getting work done or keeping group members happy. Now, all groups have norms, okay, standards or expectations they have accepted and shared by a group's members. Norms dictate things such as work output levels, absenteeism, promptness, and the amount of socializing on the job. And again, they are those expectations or standards that are accepted and shared by the group members. Now, because individuals want to be accepted by groups to which they belong, they're susceptible to pressures to conform. But conformity can go too far, especially when an individual's opinion differs significantly from that of others in the group. In such a case, the group often exerts intense pressure on the individual to align his or her opinion to conform to others' opinions. A phenomenon known as groupthink, and we covered groupthink, I believe, in Chapter 1. Groupthink seems to occur when group members hold a positive group image they want to protect, and when the group perceives a collective threat to this positive image. So somebody with a lot of credibility has an idea, makes a statement, and people just kind of go that way without any dynamics being introduced of another idea or maybe a better idea. So the group tends to sway. So again, groupthink is when a group exerts an extensive pressure on an individual to align his or her opinion with others' opinions. So, early experiments done by Solomon Asch demonstrated the impact conformity has on an individual's judgment and attitudes. In these experiments, groups of 7 or 8 people were asked to compare 2 cards held up by the experimenter. One card had 3 lines of different lengths, and the other had 1 line that was equal in length to one of the 3 lines on the other card. So look here at Exhibit 13-4. Now, each group member was announced out loud which of the 3 lines matched the single line. Asch wanted to see what would happen if members began to give incorrect answers. Would pressures to conform cause individuals to give wrong answers just to be consistent with the others? The experiment was fixed so that all but one of the members, the unsuspecting subject, were told ahead of time to start giving obvious incorrect answers after 1 or 2 rounds. Over many experiments and trials, the unsuspecting subject conformed over 1/3 of the time. So group structure. Here we have status systems. Status, a prestige, grading, position, or rank within the group. Usually the higher the status, the more one's able to influence groupthink. Group size. Social loafing is the tendency for individuals to expend less effort when working collectively than when working individually. So a lot of people, when you put them in a social environment, people start deviating from the path or the mission, or people just start working under the pretense that other people are doing the work. So, the sense of urgency dissipates some. And then you have group cohesiveness, and that's the degree to which group members are attracted to one another and share the group's goals. Now, research has generally shown that highly cohesive groups have more effective than are less cohesive ones. However, the relationship between cohesiveness and effectiveness is complex. A key moderating variable is the degree to which the group's attitude aligns with its goals or with the goals of the organization. Now, here at Exhibit 13-5, it represents the relationship between cohesiveness and effectiveness. I'm going to leave this up for you note takers to take a look. Okay, moving on. Now, studies have shown that managers spend up to 30 hours a week in group meetings. Undoubtedly, a large portion of that time is spent formulating problems, developing solutions, and determining how to implement the solutions. It's possible, in fact, for groups to be assigned any of the 8 steps in the decision-making process. What advantages do groups' decisions have over individual decisions? One is that the groups generate more complete information and knowledge. Remember, we talked before about that cognitive diversity. Why do we want to include more people in our decision making? And this was back when we discussed this decision making model in previous chapters. Now, they bring a diversity of experience. There's that diversity and perspectives to the decision process that an individual cannot. In addition, groups generate more diverse alternatives because they have a greater amount of diversity of the information. Next, groups increase acceptance of a solution. Group members are reluctant to fight or undermine a decision that they have helped to develop. Now, finally, groups increase legitimacy. Decisions made by groups may be perceived as more legitimate than decisions made by one person. So group decisions also have disadvantages. Now, one is that the group almost always takes more time to reach a solution than it would an individual. Another is that a dominant or vocal minority can heavily influence the final decision. In addition, groupthink can undermine critical thinking in the group and harm the quality of the final decision. Now, finally, in a group, members share responsibility, but the responsibility of any single member is ambiguous. Now, what techniques can managers use to help groups make more creative decisions? Here in Exhibit 13-6, it describes 3 possibilities. So you have your electronic meetings, you have your nominal group technique, and you have your brainstorming. So electronic meetings, decision-making groups that interact by using linked computers. The nominal group technique is a group of decision-making technique in which group members are presented with a problem. Each member independently writes down his or her ideas on the problem, and then each member presents one idea to the group until all the ideas have been presented. No discussion takes place until all the ideas have been presented. And then brainstorming, an idea generating process that encourages alternatives while withholding criticisms. Now, conflict is perceived incompatible differences resulting in some form of interference or opposition. Whether the differences are real is irrelevant. If people in a group perceive that differences exist, then there is conflict. The traditional view of conflict argues that conflict must be avoided. That is, it indicates that a problem is existent within the group. Now, another view, the human relations view of conflict, argues that conflict is a natural and inevitable outcome in any group and need not to be negative, but has the potential to be a positive force in contributing to a group's performance. If any of you ever heard of the Thomas model of conflict, you have what they call constructive and destructive conflict. And conflict can be just as much constructive or it can be destructive, depending on the type of conflict and how it's handled. So the third and most recent view, and that's the interactionist view of conflict, proposes that not only can conflict be a positive force in a group, but that some conflict is absolutely necessary for a group to perform effectively. The interactionist view doesn't suggest that all conflicts are good. Some conflicts, functional conflicts, are constructive and support the goals of the work group and improve its performance. Other conflicts, dysfunctional conflicts, are destructive and prevent a group from achieving its goals. You think about constructive conflict. If something really isn't working out correctly, and instead of arguing over it, maybe you have a cross-functional project, and you have two different production departments who are fighting over a process or a procedure, and possibly the equipment that's involved in production. Rather than fighting and arguing over it, they take more of a collaborative style, and they come to maybe realize that there's a better way of doing it, and it results in a best practice, rather than having two department heads, butting heads and arguing, pointing fingers, and then it becomes totally destructive, and it actually decreases the productivity, so it becomes more harmful. So that's the difference between constructive conflict and destructive conflict. One results in more collaboration, and further collaboration results in some process improvements, and then the other one's just destructive. It's people who can't collaborate, individuals who end up fighting, and then it ends up creating or actually decreases the cohesive team, takes away the cohesive social capital. So Exhibit 13-7 here illustrates the challenge facing managers in respect to conflict and group performance. I'm going to leave this up. So task conflict relates to the content and goals of the work. Relationship conflict focuses on interpersonal relationships. And then you have process conflict, and that refers to how the work gets done. Research shows that relationship conflicts are almost always dysfunctional because of the interpersonal hostilities, increased personality clashes, and decreased mutual understanding, and the tasks don't get done. That was kind of the example I was explaining a few slides ago. On the other hand, low levels of process conflict and low to moderate levels of task conflict are functional. Now, for process conflict to be productive, it must be minimal. Otherwise, intense arguments over who should do what may become dysfunctional and can lead to uncertainty about task assignments. It can increase the time to complete tasks and result in members working at cross purposes. Now, as the group performance or satisfaction model shows, the impact that group processes have on group performance and member satisfaction is modified by the task the group is doing. So more specifically, it's the complexity and interdependence of tasks that influence a group's effectiveness. Tasks are either simple or complex. Simple tasks are routine and standardized, and complex tasks tend to be a novel or non-routine. It appears that more complex tasks, the more a group benefits from group discussion about alternate work methods. So I'm going to say that again. It appears that the more complex the task is, the more a group benefits from group discussion about alternative work methods. A high degree of interdependence among the tasks that group members must perform means they'll need to interact more. Thus, effective communication and controlled conflict are most relevant to group performance when tasks are complex and interdependent. So the difference between groups and teams. Most of you probably are familiar with teams, especially if you watched or participated in organized sporting events. Now, work teams differ from work groups and have their own unique traits. Okay, and we're going to cover them in Exhibit 13-8 here momentarily. But work groups interact primarily to share information and to make decisions to help each member do his or her job more effectively and efficiently. There is no need or opportunity for work groups to engage in collective work that requires joint effort. On the other hand, work teams are groups whose members work intensely on a specific common goal using their positive synergy and individual and mutual accountability and complementary skills. Now we're going to move on to 13-8, depicts the difference between groups and teams. Okay, so where a work team would have a leadership role being shared, work groups tend to have one leader clearly in charge. Work teams accountable to self and the team, where work groups are essentially you're only accountable to yourself. The team creates a specific purpose, where the group, the purpose is the same as broader organizational purpose. Work teams, work is done collectively. Work groups, work is done individually. In work teams, meetings characterized by open-ended discussion and collaborative problem solving. In work groups, meetings characterized by efficiency, no collaboration or open-ended discussion. And in work teams, performance is measured directly by evaluating collective work output. In work groups, performance is measured indirectly according to its influence on others. And in work teams, work is decided upon and done together. In work groups, work is decided upon by a group leader and delegated to individual group members. And in work teams, it can be quickly assembled, deployed, refocused, and disbanded, where groups can't. Now, there's a synergy to a team where it's just a matter of a change in mission, or task, where they're used to operating with that cohesiveness. The team knows one another. Strengths and weaknesses are very transparent. That's not the same with a group. And that shared leader, with shared leadership, you have that empowerment where the expert power of one may supersede the legitimate power of another. So groups in a team, people are more willing to yield to somebody over expert power for expert power over legitimate power. So if somebody's a subject matter expert, that person can take control of the team. Where groups, that leader of the group is not going to relinquish control. So when work teams first became popular, most were problem-solving teams. Teams from the same department or functional area involved in efforts to improve work activities or to solve specific problems. Members share ideas or offer suggestions on how work processes and other methods can be improved. However, these teams are rarely given the authority to implement any of their suggested actions. Now, although problem-solving teams were helpful, they didn't go far enough in getting employees involved in work-related decisions and processes. Now, this shortcoming led to another type of team a self-managed work team, that being a formal group of employees who operate without a manager and are responsible for a complete work process or segment. Now, a self-managed team is responsible for getting the work done and for managing themselves, which usually includes planning and scheduling of work, assigning tasks to members, collective control over the pace of work, and making operating decisions and taking actions on problems. Now, the third type of team is a cross-functional team, which we've talked about before, which is a work team composed of individuals from various functional specialties. Many organizations use cross-functional teams. And the final type of team is the virtual team, and that is a team that uses technology to link physically dispersed members to achieve a common goal. In a virtual team, members collaborate online with tools such as a wide area network, video conferencing, fax, email, or websites where the team can hold online conferences. Virtual teams can do all the things that other teams can, share information, make decisions, and complete tasks. However, they lack the normal give and take of face-to-face discussions. Okay. However, research on teams provides insights into the characteristics typically associated with effective teams. High-performance teams have a clear understanding of the goal to be achieved. Members are committed to the team's goals. They know what are expected to accomplish and understand how they will work together to achieve these goals. And effective teams are composed of competent individuals who have the necessary technical and interpersonal skills to achieve the desired goals while working together. This last point is important because not everyone who is technically competent has the interpersonal skills to work well as a team member. And then you have effective teams are characterized by high mutual trust among members. That is, members believe in each other's ability, character, and integrity. And as you probably know from personal relationships, trust is fragile. Maintaining this trust requires careful attention by managers. Unified commitment is characterized by dedication to the team's goals and a willingness to expend extraordinary amounts of energy to achieve them. Members of an effective team exhibit intense loyalty and dedication to the team and are willing to do whatever it takes to help their team succeed. Now, not surprisingly, effective teams are characterized by good communication. Members convey messages verbally and non-verbally between each other in ways that are readily and clearly understood. Also, feedback helps guide team members and correct misunderstandings. Effective teams are continually making adjustments to whom does what, and this flexibility requires team members to possess negotiation skills. Because problems and relationships regularly change within teams, members need to be able to confront and reconcile those differences. So effective team leaders are important. They can motivate a team to follow them through the most difficult situations. How? By clarifying goals, demonstrating that change is possible, by overcoming inertia, increasing the self-confidence of team members, and helping members to more fully realize their potential. Now, increasingly, effective team leaders act as coaches and facilitators. They help guide and support the team, but don't control it. Now, studies have shown that when a team's leader's emotional displays, positive and negative, are used at appropriate times, the team's functioning and performance can be enhanced. Now, research on teams provide insights into the characteristics typically associated with effective teams, and these characteristics are listed here in Exhibit 13-9. And it illustrates the characteristics typically exhibited with effective teams, such as clear goals, relevant skills, mutual trust, unified commitment, good communication, negotiation skills, appropriate leadership, internal support, and external support. So in global organizations, understanding the relationship between group performance and group member resources is more challenging because of the unique cultural characteristics represented by members of a global team. In addition to recognizing team members' abilities, skills, knowledge, and personality, managers need to be familiar with and clearly understand the cultural characteristics of the groups and the group members they manage. Now, some of the structural areas where we see differences in managing global teams include conformity, status, social loafing, and cohesiveness. Are conformity findings generalizable across cultures? Research suggests that Ash's findings are culture-bound. For instance, as might be expected, conformity to social norms tends to be higher in collectivist cultures than in individualistic cultures. Now, despite this tendency, however, groupthink tends to be less of a problem in global teams because members are less likely to feel pressure to conform to the ideas, conclusions, and decisions of the group. Here in this exhibit, 13-10 illustrates the drawbacks and benefits of global teams. So some of the drawbacks, dislike of team members, mistrust of team members, stereotyping, communication problems, stress and tension, all the things we've already spoke about. And benefits, same thing, greater diversity of ideas, limited groupthink, and increased attention on understanding others' ideas and perspectives. Now, with the emphasis on teams in today's organizations, managers need to recognize that people don't automatically know how to be a part of a team or to be an effective team member. Like any behavior, sometimes you have to learn about the skill and then keep practicing and reinforcing it. In building team skills, managers must view their role as more of being a coach and developing team members in order to create more committed, collaborative, and inclusive teams. It's important to recognize that not everyone is a team player or can learn to be a team player. If attempts at team building aren't working, then maybe it's better to put those people in positions where their work is done individually. And we can't leave this chapter on managing teams without looking at the patterns of informal connections with individuals within groups. That is, at the social network structure. Now, what actually happens within groups, how do members relate to each other, and how does work get done? Managers need to understand the social networks and social relationships of work groups. Why do you say that? Because groups' informal social relationships can help or hinder its effectiveness. So in review of our first learning objective, a group is two or more interacting and interdependent individuals who come together to achieve specific goals. Formal groups are work groups defined by the organization structure and have designated work assignments and specific tasks directed at accomplishing organizational goals. Informal groups are social groups. The forming stage consists of two phases. First, joining the group and defining the group's purpose, the structure, and leadership. Now, the storming stage is one of intergroup conflict over who will control the group and what the group will be doing. Then you have the norming stage, is when the close relationships and cohesiveness develop and norms are determined. And then the performing stage is when group members begin to work on group's tasks. The adjourning stage is when the group prepares to disband. Now, in review of our second learning objective, a group is two or more interacting and interdependent individuals who come together to achieve specific goals. Formal groups are work groups defined by the organization structure and have designated work assignments and specific tasks directed at accomplishing organizational goals. Informal groups are social groups. The forming stage, which we already went over, we don't have to touch on that anymore. We're going to move on to our third learning objective, and that is the challenges of managing global teams can be seen in the group members' resources, especially the diverse culture characteristics, the group structure, especially conformity, status, social loafing, and cohesiveness, group processes, especially with communication and managing conflict, and the manager's role in making it all work. Now, with the emphasis on teams in today's organizations, managers need to recognize that people don't automatically know how to be part of a team or to be an effective team member. Like any other behavior, team members have to learn about the skill and then keep practicing and reinforcing it. In building team skills, managers must view their roles as more of being a coach and developing others to create more committed, collaborative, and inclusive teams. Managers need to understand the patterns of informal connections among individuals within groups because those informal social relationships can help or hinder the group's effectiveness. Now, in review of our fourth and final learning objective, the 12 common decision-making errors and biases include overconfidence, immediate gratification, anchoring, selective perception, confirmation, framing, availability. We went through all these in the first chapter, and the managerial decision-making model helps explain how the decision-making process is used to choose the best alternatives, either through maximizing or satisficing, and then implement it and evaluate the alternative. It also helps explain what factors affect the decision-making process, including the decision-making approach, the types of problems and decisions, and the decision-making conditions and the decision-maker style. Okay. So just know the 12 common decision-making errors and biases. And that concludes. So thank you for your participation in the Chapter 13 lecture. Stay tuned for the Chapter 14 lecture. Until then, check Blackboard for the week's activities and assignments.